You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 4, Arson, by R.A. Consul. Chapter 22, Emergence. If attempting to tame multiple dragons, it is necessary to recognize they will not share territory with other males unless they are siblings. The easiest way to tell if two dragons are siblings is to introduce them to each other in an enclosed space. If they do not try to kill each other, they are brothers.
Marie, wake up! You need to call the fairy!
The queen woke very reluctantly, despite a small man standing on her bed shouting at her.
Kuro, what time is it? How did you get in my room? Why are you in your pajamas? Why is that Lutin biting you?
They were all very reasonable questions. Ones he would be happy to answer in full once he knew that the princess was on its way. Instead, he chose to answer in brief.
Yes, it's me. It's very late. I blinked. I didn't have time to get dressed because I won't let go of her and she's angry about it.
Are you all right, Your Majesty? Asked Belladonna through the door. She had the unenviable duty of being on night watch. Given the tedium of the job, she sounded almost eager for Marie's answer to be no.
Yeah, it's just Kuro, said Marie.
That was not as reassuring as she might have hoped. The door flew open and the lights came on. Belladonna's armor flowed out from her cuffs like lava, covering her head to toe and hardening in seconds into sculpted plates of obsidian. Shingle panicked and tried to blink away. Kuro resisted and tried to hold them in place. They both regretted the resulting flicker.
You really need to call the boat,
Kuro repeated as he tried to hold down the bile that was attempting to avoid joining him on any future blink-based misadventures.
Dragons are coming, kind of a lot of them. One of them is very, very big.
Kuro saw the doubt and disbelief play out across Marie's face. It was, of course, an absurd claim. One dragon was a rarity. Lots of them together was the stuff of children's stories. Even Marie knew that. Your Majesty, said Belladonna, in the sort of way that implied that she probably should do something violent to the intruder in the queen's bedchamber, but didn't actually want to. She was looking for some kind of order to allow her to not bisect the boy. Marie held up a hand, encouraging Bella to pause while she thought. She looked into his eyes and chose to believe him. What do you need me to do?
I don't know, he said. I haven't thought that far. I'm kind of panicking. I figured if you called the fairy, they'd have to listen because you're a queen.
He vanished. He reappeared moments later.
Please stop that,
he said to the lutin held tight in his grip.
You kidnapped me,
she snarled back and bit him again.
You're one to talk, he retorted. I just need your help for a few minutes. I'm trying to save people. Wizards, she spat.
Yes, he agreed and made no effort to counter her low opinion of them.
But ones like her will kill a lot of dragons before they get eaten, he pointed at Bella, still armored. And the rest are just kids.
That last bit got through to her and she stopped struggling. It didn't stop him learning several lutin curse words, though.
Can you call the boat? Kuro asked, turning his attention back to the queen.
I don't know how, she replied.
If you wrote a letter demanding the boat come early, Belladonna advised, I expect I'd drag the crew out of bed by their ankles to get it moving.
Marie shuffled to her writing desk and worked to navigate the collection of royal pens and embossed letterhead. What should I tell them? If I say it's on account of dragons, they'll think I've gone mad.
A queen does not need to explain herself, said Bella.
Letter scribed, signed and sealed, Kuro presented it to Shingle.
Can you deliver this?
She looked at the rich vellum envelope as if it were her first time encountering a letter.
I'm not a postal lutin. I don't know where it goes.
Kuro thought fast and didn't really like where the thought landed him.
I'll take it to Arthur's dad. He'll know how to get it where it needs to go.
What should we do in the meantime? Asked Marie.
I don't know. Maybe wake up the teachers and get people to the dock. They'll listen to you. And if they don't, I bet Bella can make them.
Shingle, who had relaxed slightly in his grip, started to tense up again.
Wait, isn't Arthur's dad?
He pulled her through to the kitchen he remembered from the previous solstice before she had a chance to start fighting. There, wearing a housecoat over his uniform clothes, with a piece of toast dangling from his mouth and a look on his face like he just had the longest day of work imaginable, was Knight Commander Talon Dubois. "For some reason, I'm not surprised to see you," he mumbled around the toast.
"Why is that?"
Crow asked, a bit shocked at the lack of shock. "Because it's been weird. And when things are weird, you're involved. We've had pipes bursting and sinkholes forming and weird weather. We've been putting out fires all night." As if on cue, a warning siren blared. "Oh, not again," he groaned, and started trading his housecoat for the long green uniform jacket of the hounds.
"It's not just on Avalon,"
Crow said aloud, sharing his realization.
"Is it?"
he asked Shingle. She shook her head.
"From what I've been told, hatchings are synchronized." "How many?"
asked Crow.
"Nobody knows. Hundreds at least. Maybe thousands. The world is big."
"Wanna fill me in?" growled the hound.
"Dragons," said Crow. "Lots of dragons hatching all at once. They're on Avalon too. We need the ferry."
A gout of flame streaked across the sky out the kitchen window. Then another. Talon Dubois had earned his post through grit and ruthless determination. He had seen the worst humanity had to offer and come out the other side a battle-hardened veteran. He saw the situation before him, and through the wisdom gained from years of hard-earned experience, responded with the calm and calculated reaction expected of such a man. "Shit," he said. Crow pressed Marie's letter into the hound's hands.
"Use this if it helps. It's the Queen's demand for the boat to come early."
"You'll get your boat," said Dubois with the sort of firmness that promised to push it across the bay himself if he had to. "Just keep the kids safe till it gets there." That was a lot of responsibility to place on the shoulders of a teenage street thief. But the hound had nobody else in the kitchen he could entrust that duty to.
"I'll do my best,"
Crow said, and pulled Shingle through one more blink. Back in his bedroom in Autumn Lodge, he released Shingle.
"Thank you," he said, "and sorry about that."
She rubbed her wrist where he'd held her too tightly.
"I'd have done the same," she said. "What will you do now?" Crow asked. "I still need to attend to Maripogo," she said,
and then nearly said more, but thought better of it. Instead, she chose something approaching an expression of concern.
"Don't get eaten,"
she added, then vanished. The calm weather had cracked, and a hurricane had spilled out. His window rattled, and trees creaked outside. Dragons were moving, and even the wind knew it. He dressed quickly and went to wake the lodge. They were broadly unreceptive to a pre-dawn cry from Kuro that amounted to claims that the sky was falling. Charlie hardly believed that he believed himself. She knew too much about dragons to accept any of it, though she was a good enough friend to accept his panic and get out of bed. One person in the lodge did believe him, though. Old Pete listened to the frantic tale, to which he expressed neither doubt nor surprise. He just took a slow intake of breath, followed by an even slower release. He looked around the lodge with dampening eyes, as though looking at a loved one for the last time.
"So, it's time,"
he said so softly it was barely audible above the wind outside. Whether the Luton had told him directly or he'd just pieced it together from his many years of sharing a kitchen with them, he didn't say. It didn't matter. He was the caretaker of Autumn Lodge, and he'd known that someday that job would include watching the lodge burn. Maybe it wouldn't be him. It might not have happened for another century, but it was inevitable. He retrieved a gnarled old walking stick from his room and woke Margaret with a nod. The grizzly bear and the old wizard shared a glance and maybe a thought, and she roared. Kuro had never heard her roar. It shook the lodge, cracked a window, and made several first-years cry. Old Pete ran his hand along the wall near the door and patted it, almost like he was apologizing. Then balled his knobby hand into a fist and thumped the wood. He didn't hit it very hard, but clearly the wall didn't know that. It shattered, splintered from foundation to roof. The whole front of the lodge fell as matchsticks, joining the dry leaves that had piled eternally against it. "Get your kids," he said simply to Charlie. It was incredible how all the running and screaming Kuro had done could be so vastly eclipsed by a grim look from Pete. Students peering out of their rooms, most of which were now open to the elements, saw him hitching Margaret to the baggage cart in the pre-dawn light. Old Pete did not waste effort in the same way he did not waste words, and he did not display his power, well, ever. Whether they believed Kuro or not, they believed this was an emergency. With his chosen aides acting as his voice, the lodgers began to move. Bags were hastily stuffed and tossed out through the missing wall to those waiting below. Half-packed and half-dressed, the lodge was on the march. Kuro called up the wind and readied his umbrella. "Where are you going?" asked Charlie, her gaggle of first-years clinging to her for comfort. "I have to warn the other residences," Kuro replied. "They won't believe you," said Charlie. "I know, but they have to be awake to not believe me." With that, he let the wind pull him skywards. Below him, he saw fires sparking throughout the forest. The young dragons were burning their way upward, and their heat was preceding them. It wouldn't be long until the first ones pushed their way through and he'd no longer have the sky to himself. He flew as fast as the west wind could carry him. They were buffeted and tossed along the way by other winds, hot and dry, wet and cold, winds from all seasons coming unmoored and tearing around Avalon. The land was tied to the dragon that slept beneath it. That dragon slept no longer. She moved, and the magic that held the island in seasonal stasis moved with her. A gray dawn was breaking. Angry clouds mingled with sad ones on the horizon. In the long shadows of morning, he could make out the snowy roofs of the mausoleums below. Despite the warnings, he took a detour to see the Norns, to either warn them or scream at them, depending how much they had known. The graveyard was littered with boughs of holly and sigils of chalk. Arranged in a wide circle around a raised slab of stone were the six, foxes and women alternating. Lines of ash connected them, whatever magics they had done having melted away the slushy snow of the graveyard and scorched the ground beneath. At the center, Sam sat on the stone slab, staring around her as if in a dream. He slammed down into the middle of their circle, startling all of them from the haze of their ritual. "Kuro," Sam said in surprise without looking at him, then took what seemed like 3 tries to find the set of eyes that she was attached to. "What are you doing here?" "Dragons," he said, not wanting to drag out the conversation. "It was dragons." The elder Norns all rolled their eyes and nodded, as if finally identifying a barely audible melody playing in the background. Then, as one, they played through to the chorus of that ancient and hazy memory, and their eyes grew wide. "We're trapped on an island during a dragon emergence," White said with obvious dread. "The boat's coming early. Get to the docks," said Kuro, trying to abbreviate as much as possible. All 4 rushed to comply, but their newest member was still muddled. Sam stumbled and tripped over things that were in front of other people, and her fox bolted directly into a tree. "She's in no condition to run across the island," said White. "It will be hours yet before she can see straight." "Put her in here," said Kuro, tossing his satchel to them. "Tell Autolycus to bring it back to me when you get to the ferry." They did not ask him to explain. He did not wait for them to. He had people to awaken. The wonderful thing about Wertheim was that everyone slept in a communal room around a great fire. It built the sense of community and kinship vital to those who lived in the frozen reaches of the far north. It also made it very easy to wake up everyone at the same time. Kuro flew through the kitchen, whose staff were just starting to assemble breakfast for the young elven wizards of Wertheim. They were not at all in a state of mind to comprehend the fast-moving blur of apologies that shot past them. One found a ladle they'd been using missing from their hand. Another, a fresh bucket of goat milk he'd just spent half an hour collecting. Kuro dumped the milk in the huge central fireplace. The thick bed of coals roared its complaint at being quenched, and steam poured off, filling the room with the very distinct and difficult to ignore stink of boiling goat's milk. The ladle was not for the milk. It was for the bucket. He banged the tin bucket as hard as he could, a loud and tuneless bell to wake the sleeping students in the most efficient and least pleasant way possible. His reasoning for this approach being that people who woke up angry stayed awake. Whether or not he enjoyed himself isn't the sort of thing that should be considered in an emergency situation. "Boat's coming early!" he shouted. Then, thinking they needed some kind of reason to get people moving, added, "Bad weather's on its way!" Which wasn't untrue. Before any angry elves could grab him to work out with their fists their anger at being woken so rudely, he opened his umbrella and shot up through the wide chimney, following the cloud of rising steam out into the stormy morning. He grossly underestimated how long it would take for an angry wizard to get airborne. Eric Erickson's brand new sled burst out from the front doors, followed by two others on brooms. He would have very much liked to explain himself, but it was hard to do over the whipping wind while dodging fireballs, ice spikes, and some very harsh language, because the third member of the pursuers didn't know any combat spells, but was still very upset and wanted him to know it. Kuro whirled and dodged, clinging to his umbrella for dear life and utterly failing to make any progress towards the spring quarter to wake the Château du Printemps. A streak of fire across the sky above the autumn quarter informed him that they had run out of time. He caught a gust of wind and launched himself at Eric. Eric was not to be caught off guard a second time. He held fast to his sled, ducked the umbrella, and prepared to meet the boy behind it with a fist. The boy, though, was no longer attached to the umbrella, so the fist met open air. He was surprised to find his target clinging to the front of his sled and pointing. It was an obvious bluff, and he began to conjure some flame to burn the intruder off his sled. Kuro flung himself off the edge and dangled from the bottom to make himself a harder target. Eric tried to shake him loose, but couldn't help but notice the fact that his opponent wasn't even looking in his direction anymore. He risked a glance and saw a monster. The newborn male lacked the beauty of its sister. Its scales were mottled browns and greens, with skin hanging loose along its gangly neck. Its huge bat-like wings pulled him through the air, fighting the weight of its claws and teeth, which looked too big for its body. It vomited liquid flame and squawked with curiosity at the other things joining it in the sky. There is something about the approach of a curious young dragon that encourages a remarkable degree of cooperation and understanding. It facilitated a sudden mending of fences and a unification of vision. Consensus was reached among the airborne combatants that their plan of action required a new direction, that direction being mostly down and away from the incoming monster. Once they were out of the air and hiding among trees, the approaching dragon hatchling lost interest in the mysterious creatures that it had shared the sky with, and discovered its first love, something that would fill most of its waking mind for the rest of its life. The builders of Wertheim, in their infinite wizardly wisdom, had shingled the entire roof in gold shields. The dragon tore at the shields with glee, spouting flame as it trumpeted delight at its discovery. It rolled around on the gold like a tabby in catnip, and tried to hold more plates in its mouth than would fit, like a dog with access to too many balls. Having their roof torn apart and their buildings starting to burn served as a powerful motivator, much more effective than a clanging bucket and a cloud of steam. Students started to scatter. "The dock!" Kuro shouted to Eric, hoping his age and pedigree would command some sort of authority over the Alfheim contingent. "The boat is coming!" The bigger boy nodded and whipped the ghostly dogs, drawing his sled into motion. Kuro had to hope that was a sign of him taking charge and not running away. He didn't have time to waste trying to wrangle people who had no interest in listening to him. He had to get to Spring, which, to be fair, also contained a lot of people who had no interest in listening to him. But they wouldn't be awake yet, so they could start not listening to him after he fixed that. Or so he thought. He arrived to find an orderly exit of the building ongoing. Carriages were being loaded with luggage. and students were all dressed in their travel clothes as if absolutely nothing out of the ordinary were happening. He folded his umbrella and walked among the calm and orderly Acadian students in wonder. Eventually, he came upon Evelyn Lemieux, who was imperiously directing things. "What's going on?" he asked. "We are leaving," she said. "Her Majesty asked me to wake le chateau and ensure their timely arrival at the dock." "Why is everyone so calm?" "Is there a reason not to be? The Queen demanded the boat arrive early. The chateau residents will be ready." "Did she tell you why?" Crow fretted at the unhurried pace of carriages being loaded outside the residence. "She did not," said Evelyn. "She informed me that I would not have believed her if she did." It struck Crow that this might be a better method than he'd used in Wertheim. It was much more disciplined. That was until he was also struck by a piece of mortar. He looked up to find a small dragon tearing a golden finial off the top of the chateau's towers. "That's why," he said, directing Evelyn's gaze. She was at first shocked, then dismissive. It was a dragon, true, but not a very big one. Certainly a couple of knights would be able to dispatch it without much difficulty. Then a second landed to fight over the tower decoration with the first. Then a third. The calm in the crowd shattered like the stained glass windows of the chateau under the wrestling hatchlings. Kuro raised his umbrella to shield them from the rain of shards. Evelyn raised her hand. With an elegant flourish, Evelyn transformed the falling multicolored glass. It burst into a flurry of petals, which spun away harmlessly in the wind. Whatever he felt about the girl, she had skill. "I will see you at the docks," she said as if dismissing him, then walked into the scattering crowd with purpose, rallying the senior students to defend the juniors. He spent a moment loathing her for her unshaken confidence in the face of danger. Allies, he reminded himself. She was helping. Her being better than him at this was a good thing. He took to the sky once more. It was growing dark as lowering storm clouds mixed with rising smoke. As rain started to fall, so did teachers. Not every adult wizard was ready to fight a dragon, even a baby one. But if there was one thing they were capable of, it was getting students to move. The chaos in spring started to flow towards the docks, joining a growing stream already moving from Summerhill. Flashes of lightning, flying rocks, and thunderous explosions along the road warded away curious hatchlings, encouraging them to find their meals elsewhere. There was little left that Kuro could do. He was no leader and no warrior. What he could be was a distraction. He flew by a young dragon who looked a bit too curious about a running junior student. For better and worse, it was more interested in the creature sharing the sky with it than the cowering one on the ground. It gave chase, its long neck allowing it to snap at Kuro despite its clumsy flight on new wings. It was almost fun, dancing through the sky with a newly fledged dragon nipping at his heels. Down below, some others were having a less enjoyable time avoiding the young dragons. The Weavers, whatever incredible powers they might possess, could neither fly nor fight. They were land-bound humans running through knee-deep snow. From the graveyard, they were about as far from the docks as they could be, and their choices were limited to winter or autumn. With the fiery exit of young dragons through dry leaves, autumn was fast becoming an inferno, and so they'd chosen winter for their escape. The three already exhausted women had garnered the interest of a pair of hatchlings. They prowled around as the Norns played a game of hide-and-seek with them through the snowy woods. They'd take turns, popping out of cover and drawing attention away while the other two ran to find new places to hide behind rocky outcroppings and snowy overhangs. From the sky, Kuro could see the confidence in their movements, the certainty with which they manipulated the pair of baby dragons in their game of cat and mouse. They could probably do this all day, but more dragons were coming, and they had a lot of open snow to cross before they found the dock. He dropped low over the winter woods, drawing the attention of their pursuers as he screamed past the young dragons. They found him much more interesting than the slippery prey in the woods, and joined their brother in the chase. He drew them away from Winter and the Norns, over to the increasingly smoke-filled sky above Autumn. One dragon had been easy to dodge. 3 was a challenge. He whipped in and around the tall trees that weren't yet burning. The dragons were clumsy on their new wings, but were learning fast, and the obstacle course Kuro was putting them through was hastening their improvement. Worse, they seemed to be enjoying it and showed no interest in letting up. The whirling dance through the autumn quarter intersected with the parade of lodgers heading down the long road to the docks. They, too, were being harried by young dragons. Older students used what magic they had to discourage the curious hatchlings, hurling sticks, stones, and harsh language at them. Others fought back the smoke and flames that choked off passage along the road. Old Pete appeared calm as he drove the cart, probably because he had a powerful defender of him and the cart. Charlie stood on the luggage, guiding a collection of whole hams through the air, baiting the dragons away from the children and into each other. They chased the salty meat and fought over it when one of their brothers got too close. The path was littered with pairs of baby brothers wrestling with each other. Some of those still airborne found him much more interesting than the hovering ham they'd been failing to catch, so joined their brothers in Kuro's pursuit. The west wind pulled him with all her might around the butte. She was strong enough to outpace the dragons with ease, but there was a limit to how hard Kuro could hold on. His arms strained to stay connected to his torso, his hands held on only because they'd seized in that position. The division between the seasons had been reduced to 2 distinct regions. As Kuro circled the islands with eager young dragons on his tail, he passed from wet and stormy to dry and stormy, with the exciting addition that the dry side was also on fire. On each of his passes around the island, the fires worsened. A swath of what had been autumn was fully ablaze, and not just from the playful gouts expelled by the babies. It was being cooked from below. Merepogo was coming. Having failed to outpace the dragons chasing him, and rapidly growing weaker, Kuro tried another approach. He held his breath, shut his eyes, and plunged into the billowing smoke above Autumn. Flying blind, he put his trust in the west wind and hoped he'd lose some of his followers in the smoke screen. It was hotter than he'd imagined, a fact that weakened him but didn't even draw the notice of dragons who burst themselves from liquid gold. His lungs gave out before the smoke. He emerged out of the far side coughing. His grip, sweaty and weak, slipped from the handle. The thin strap around his wrist was the only thing tethering him to his umbrella. He had no choice but to land, to clear his lungs, dry his hands, and, if he hadn't been eaten by that point, take off again. He hit the ground near the edge of summer based on how the foliage felt. Soft, lush, and, of critical importance, not on fire. He coughed, then choked on the smoke he hadn't quite expunged and coughed again. A curious chirp nearby informed him that he'd not quite escaped his entourage. Through stinging, tear-filled eyes, he could make out the wobbly outline of a young dragon deciding whether the thing making such horrible noises in front of it was food. Kuro held very, very still, hoping that anything in the book he'd read had been true, and a dragon's habit of hunting fleeing prey was part of their fundamental nature, and not just a mild preference. The young dragon seemed to be trying to answer that same question for himself. It hadn't the benefit of reading that book, so it wasn't clear on the expectations placed on it. At the very least, the potential meal failing to run away was confusing and not nearly as fun. The decision-making process was distracted by an approaching rumble of thunder. New to the world, the dragon didn't know what thunder was supposed to sound like, but buried in its instincts was a sense that it should not have a regular rhythm and a steadily increasing volume. It turned to find the source of the noise and experience what would likely be remembered as the most confusing moment in its young life. Bursting through the underbrush was what could only be described as a very fast-moving and angry tree, which kicked it square in the gut. The dragon lurched from the impact and scrambled away from the offending oak. It tried to get revenge for the assault, but the fire just dribbled out of its mouth after having the wind so thoroughly knocked out of it. Kuro had finally cried away enough of the smoke sting to recognize Azalea in her bronze armor. She was easily 10 feet tall, speckled in bluish-green tarnish, making her look like a tree trunk on the move. The wounded dragon scampered away, hissing its displeasure. Azalea wasted no time. She scooped up Kuro in one massive hand and started legging it dockwards. "You were using yourself as bait," she said. It sounded like an accusation. "It seemed like a good idea at the time," he replied. "People have familiars." She pointed skyward as Moira's goose flew overhead. Without a breath of hesitation, it attacked a dragon mid-air. It hissed and pecked and buffeted the poor startled creature until the goose was unceremoniously chomped. The artificial animal burst into silver streaks of memory, which swirled back to its creator. "They don't die when a dragon eats them," she scolded him. "Not really, not most of them. Where's Autolycus?" "He's with..." Kuro had to pause to consider his words. "The Sartorialists have my bag. They needed to carry someone. He's with them." Azalea's admonitions stopped, but from the wheezing echoing out of her armor, it was likely due to shortness of breath rather than shortness of criticisms. He moved to make himself easier to carry, riding on her broad metal shoulder, keeping lookout for dragons. The parking lot by the dock was packed. Knights held a perimeter. Teachers and senior students conjured barriers of stone, ice, and lightning over the younger ones. Mr. Pendragon and Ms. Crawley flew in on carpets carrying stragglers, a couple of frightened Wertheim kids, and a trio of remarkably unbothered tailors. Moira managed a contingent of students with flighted familiars, using the conjured creatures as bait to pull the attention of the dragons away from children and across the island. A cloud of luminous dandelion fluff streaked in and filled Charlie's memory with the last moments of Henrietta's previous flight. She screamed and fell to the pavement, clutching at her chest to be certain it was still there. Moira retracted her silver armor to catch Charlie as she fell, holding her tight, helping her back to herself. Kuro leapt from Azalea and ran to be by his friend's side, but before he crossed half the distance, she'd already regained her feet. Despite still leaning on Moira for support, she had Henrietta back in seconds. The unicorn stomped and whinnied, spread her wings, and flew off for revenge, joining Moira's indomitable goose already in flight. "I got him," said Azalea between gasps. The imposing power of the towering bronze behemoth was slightly diminished by her being bent double as she tried to regain her breath. "Well done, Ms. Lamorak," said Ms. McCutcheon. "We will count again, but I think that's the last of us. Once that is done, Kuro, I should very much like to hear how you knew to warn us." Kuro very much didn't want to explain anything to the principal. She'd developed something of a positive opinion of him ever since he'd stopped actually being her responsibility. This also felt somehow like it was his fault. Maybe he could have given more warning if he'd just asked the right questions sooner, but he'd been busy and distracted and hadn't taken the time to be curious. He was rescued from an immediate need to explain himself by something that would require him to explain himself considerably more in the near future. Charging through the forest into the parking lot was a dragon fully twice as long as any of those they'd yet encountered. Its scales glittered like sapphire along its long, wingless, serpentine body. It paused at the sight of the collection of humans, neither angered nor scared, merely fascinated. Its cunning eyes scanned with curiosity the armored bodies lining up in front of her and drawing swords. Kuro ran to put himself between the knights and the dragon. From everyone else's perspective, he'd expressed a death wish by turning his back on the ferocious beast. "Don't hurt her," he said, holding his hands in front of him as though that could halt their advance. The daughter dragon chirped excitedly at finding the scent trail she'd been following and bounded up to Kuro. She pressed her nose against where his bag had been and sniffed expectantly, nudging him like a horse that thinks he has another apple hiding somewhere, albeit an exceptionally large horse with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. "I don't have it," he said to the dragon as the whole of Avalon looked on in stunned silence. "Oh, here it is." The bag had been left where he would easily trip over it. He noted another reason to both thank and curse the Norns.
Right, here's another pie, he said. You'll have to explain to Dubois why he doesn't get a present this year.
Don't feed wild animals, Charlie shouted from across the lot. Face covered in cherry pie filling, the young dragoness caught sight of gold. She licked her lips as she plodded eagerly towards the Summer Queen, bedecked in her royal golden-colored armor.
Take off your armor, Marie, said Kuro.
That seemed like very foolish advice given the advancing dragon. Knights closed ranks in front of their queen as Kuro fought to stay between the dragon and the swords.
Don't hurt her! She's just curious, and her mother would be very upset.
The obvious question relating to how Kuro was acquainted with the parent of this dragon, and why he was feeding it pies from a satchel that definitely wasn't large enough to contain them, would not be asked at that time, because the parent chose that moment to reintroduce herself to the world. A geyser of flame erupted in the autumn quarter, permeating the smoke-filled air with the orange light of a fall sunset. Then a roar so deep it was beneath hearing, but could be felt as it rumbled through the body in ways that confused the head and unsettled the bowels. The young dragons heard the call and flocked to their mother. Her head emerged above the trees, and few could do much more than whimper in response. She started to climb the butte, coiling around it like a stripe on a candy cane, long enough to wrap fully around it and half again. She bellowed as she circled, calling out in each direction, creating tornadoes in her wake. After millennia below ground, Merepogo once again tasted the sky, and the earth trembled. Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.